Right, so I'm going to begin with some general study tips. I like to start the semester off this way just because it's better to start with these things in mind than to think about them retrograde or after the fact. So here are some general tips, tricks that you can think about or use as needed. Some of these are not going to work for everyone, but just some things to explore if you're having difficulty or if you want to get ahead and be good and be successful in the course. Because this is a rigorous course. It's a lot of material, a lot of information, and students typically find it challenging if you haven't had anatomy before, or if you haven't had more of a rigorous course like micro or so, those can be more on the higher end of the rigor scale. So here are some things that you can bear in mind and incorporate into your study schedule as needed. So try and study your most difficult topics or your most uncomfortable topics. Maybe they're not hard topics, but maybe they're things that just are not intuitive on first glance to you. So try to prioritize studying those things first. The easy topics, the things that you enjoy, maybe you're better with anatomy than physiology. So you may want to study anatomy first and then sort of reward yourself with physiology at the end. But try to scaffold and organize your study in a way where you hit the more difficult concepts first and then you get into some of the more natural or easy concepts, and you can incorporate that into your planning when you make your study schedules. And by the way, I encourage you to have a study schedule. It's going to be an important way to have some routine and order and predictability to your studying. And that is going to go a long way, not just for your college studying, but when you get into grad school or if you go to med school or anything else, it's going to help add some discipline to your studying. Try to preview class material beforehand. So just glance at the slides. Again, I know some of the text was missing from today, but going forward, just look through, see what the topic is. If there are any terms that you don't understand, pull those up and look those up and try to define or describe those. And just have a general sense of maybe what questions you may have before class so that when you come to class, it can be more meaningful and you can be more engaged because you already have sort of the map, the outline, and you're just filling in gaps and answering questions. Try to rewrite and summarize notes in your own words. You can use tables, charts, diagrams for this, and then the course outlines, the class outlines that I shared. So try to keep active. Again, just watching slides or just listening to recordings is very passive. And the literature and the science shows that that doesn't help material to stick. That doesn't help with mastery of concepts, especially more abstract concepts that are not easily visualized. So try to rewrite those in your own words. Try to make concept maps where you can show how things are interconnected. Try to summarize difficult concepts and just trying to write it out. And you'll see that and trying to write it out or even draw it out on a whiteboard or explaining it to a friend, you will identify where you hit on gaps. You cannot explain something that you do not fully understand. So you may perceive that you understand it, but in trying to summarize it and explain it, you will identify any gaps in your own understanding. Study often and incorporate active recall, active practice, and spaced repetition. So again, the science backs this up in that if you're studying, especially when it comes to memorizing, this can help in the anatomy labs where you have lots of new terms to memorize. Try to have what am I trying to say? I'm trying to have a spaced repetition planned into your schedule so that you can recall those terms, recall those concepts, maybe put it away for a couple days, and then come back to it on a repeated interval a couple times before the exam. Again, try to teach or explain concepts. That's the best way to identify any gaps. Try to practice questions, so multiple choice questions, either through SI, through the checkpoint questions, through the polling questions, and then through your weekly quizzes. Just different opportunities to practice are going to help material stick as well. And then regarding test taking, I know there can be a lot of test taking anxiety and maybe just forgetting things that you remember that you knew that you studied very well, and sometimes having a disconnect between how comfortable you are with the material and that not always translating onto your score. So with regard to test taking, some of the strategies you want to think about are reading through your questions carefully. When it comes to multiple choice questions, it's really nice to read the question, think about your automatic response. So before looking at the answer options, what is my natural response to this question? And then see where that natural response fits with the answer options. And once you have settled on an answer, try not to switch it. Don't go back, at the end of the exam in a haste and start switching your answers. The science shows that that usually leads to going from the right answer to the wrong answer. And then always ask for clarification. I'm pretty open if you want me to define a term. Maybe it's a term that you're not very familiar with. Or it's not a very layman term or one that we've discussed. Ask for clarification. I also will provide a different wording to reword the question as an opportunity for some students to just get a different way to say that same question. So during our exams, I will open a breakout room, which is a Zoom room, and you can hop on that room with me and I can break down a question, ask for clarification. You cannot answer a question that you do not understand. So if there's anything that's impeding you from understanding the question, I'm open to just clarifying that. So definitely ask for that. All right. Let me go on. We're going to go on and begin here with a simplified body plan. This is chapter 1, and then homeostasis is also included here as well. And we're going to begin with a polling question, just to tease how much understanding we have of this so far. So I'm going to launch a poll here. And then just select the best answer. And I usually give a minute for the polling questions. Okay, looks like everyone has submitted, so let's go ahead. And then I usually share the responses just so you can see where your response fell. This is all anonymous, and I can't tell who picked what, but try to be as authentic in your response so that I can get a sense of, which concepts may need further explanation. So I usually like to share the responses and then discuss. So what is the most abundant substance in the body? And most of you rightfully went with B. B is water, and that is absolutely correct. So water is the most abundant substance in our body, okay? Also on the planet, by the way. But when we think about our body, about 70% of our body is going to be water, and we'll talk about those breakdowns here. So our first lecture objective is to describe the distribution of water in the body and then define the different body fluid compartments. Okay, so when we think about this organization of the body, this is called the minimalist body because it's a schematic representative of what the body looks like in terms of the different compartments. Now, it's not accurate by any means in the shape, the size, the proportions at all, but what it does show us is the different barriers, how our body internal compartments or internal environment is separated from the external environment. It also is going to show us the areas where there can be transport, there can be exchange across that barrier. And we will discuss what those terms are when exchange happens across each of these different barriers. But this is an example of what the body would look like, the minimalist body, in terms of the separation into smaller compartments. So if we think about our internal environment, this is everything inside your body, but it is what is within your cells and your tissues. It is going to be the immediate environment around your cells, and it is going to include the tissue fluid, which is called your interstitial fluid, and then your plasma. And just to describe those two terms further, tissue fluid is the fluid that bathes your cells, also called your interstitial fluid. So if you take these cells here, for example, all of the fluid that is around these cells would be considered interstitial or tissue fluid. Then there's plasma. Plasma is fluid that is in your body, but it is not necessarily around your cells. Rather, it's in your vessels. So if you look at your blood vessels, the fluid that is forming the watery component of your blood. So if you took your blood, took out all the cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets, and so forth, and you extracted those cellular components, the fluid left behind in your vessels is called your plasma. And we can contrast that to the external environment. This is everything outside your body. It's going to be anything beyond the epithelial barriers. So the barriers in your lungs, the barriers in your gastrointestinal tract, and the barriers in your urinary and reproductive tracts, as well as your skin in general, the epithelia of your skin. So everything beyond those barriers is going to be your external environment. Now, notice it's not always going to consist of everything outside of your body necessarily, because the air and the food and the water that is sitting in your gastrointestinal tract, it's not actually inside your cells and tissues. So it is considered the external environment. Same thing with the air in your lungs. It hasn't crossed your epithelial barrier. It's just sitting in your lungs. And so while it is inside your body, it's still considered the external environment. So the environment surrounding your skin, the air in your lungs, the food in your gut, the urine in your bladder, all of that constitutes your external body environment, although some of those are going to be inside your physical body. And now we can think about what the exchange across those barriers looks like. So things that are going into these membranes are going to be nutrients and oxygen, and things that are going out are going to be waste. An example of that would be carbon dioxide or just byproducts from the metabolic breakdown of your food. That has to be eliminated as waste. And so this is the type of exchange that occurs across these various barriers. So that air or oxygen can be exchanged across your lungs. Nutrients can be exchanged across your gastrointestinal tract, as well as water. And then water and some other nutrients and ions and so forth can be exchanged across your urinary tract, along with waste. This is what urine is. The formation of that waste into urine is also exchanged across the urinary tract. Okay, so just to kind of further describe what the terms are when we have exchange across these different barriers. So we talked about exchange being possible across the lungs, across the GI tract, and across the kidneys. And so when we think about movement across the gastrointestinal tract, the unique terms for that are going to be absorption and secretion. So when we move nutrients, water, ions across into our cells and then into our blood vessels, that is called absorption. When we move water, again, nutrients in the opposite direction, that is called secretion. And we typically move water along with some mucus. Mucus helps to move the contents along just to lubricate the tract, as well as water if we are secreting water. That is going to be secretion in the opposite direction. For the kidneys, the terms are a little bit different. For the kidneys, it's going to be filtration. So when we filter the blood and we take the cells away from the plasma in order to create that waste, which is called urine, that first step is called filtration. And then because sometimes we have filtered out things that we want, maybe some glucose got in there, maybe some amino acids got in there, and we want to reclaim those vital nutrients, we're going to have reabsorption to bring those back into the blood. All right, and that's going to be the second example, and that is in the opposite direction. Now, we can also further excrete materials that were not filtered out that we do want to eliminate. maybe excess sodium or potassium. Those things are going to be eliminated later on through from the blood vessels into the urinary tract, and that is called secretion. So across the kidneys, we have three processes: the initial movement, which is filtration, the reclaiming of substances that are needed, which is reabsorption, and then the elimination of substances that were not first filtered, and that is called secretion. Right. Now we can think about the water components and the water compartments, and think about how the internal body environment is further divided into fluid compartments. So these are compartments that contain fluid, and then they're going to be separated by epithelial membranes. And membranes are semi-permeable. So membranes can allow some things to go through and other things to not go through. All right, I got a question here, so let's see. Does reabsorption happen in the bladder, or is it all just waste? Good question. So reabsorption takes place across the kidney, so not necessarily the bladder. The bladder is after all the fine tuning has been done, all the adjustments, any further secretion has happened, and then that final product moves down to the bladder. So the bladder is really just a storage tank for the already formed urine. So up in the kidneys, across the tubules of the kidneys is where reabsorption will take place. And then the final product at the end of the kidneys is going to be forming urine. So the three processes we described, filtration, reabsorption, and secretion, are all taking place in the kidneys, and then that urine is being stored in the bladder. All right. So onto our semi-permeable membrane. So semi-permeable mean that transport is going to occur for some solutes, for some substances. And this can depend on size, on charge, on shape of the different particles, but only some things will get through and others will not. And so that's the basis of movement and transport, is that it is selective to some particles. Now, if we think about all the water in our body, this is called our total body water. So all the water sitting inside your gut, inside your cells, inside your blood vessels, around your tissues, all of that is constituting your total body water. Okay, and so it's going to constitute any dissolved material, so any sodium that's dissolved, any potassium, calcium that's dissolved within your fluid compartments, as well as the cells that are sort of immersed in your blood vessels. That will all be part of your total body water. Now we can further think about dividing the total body water into your intracellular fluid and your extracellular fluid. Intracellular fluid is going to be the water inside your cells. So on the left panel here, notice that the cells of your tissues, right, your bone cells, muscle cells, liver cells, all of these cells also have water in them. Your blood cells, your erythrocytes and your leukocytes, your red and white blood cells, those also have water in them. So all the water inside cells is going to be your intracellular fluid, and that is called the cytoplasm inside the cell itself. Now compare that to your extracellular fluid, all the fluid that is outside your cells. So it's still within your body, but it's not inside the cell itself. And we can further divide the extracellular fluid into two smaller compartments. The plasma, which is the fluid that is in your blood vessels. So it's not the fluid inside your blood cells, but it's the fluid that's around those cells and within the walls of your blood vessels. And then there is the interstitial fluid, the fluid that is exclusive to to being around your cells. Again, not the fluid inside the cells, but the fluid that bathes your cells, the cells of your bones and muscles and so forth. So just to reiterate that here again, we have all of our water in the body is the total body water. If we divide that into two smaller divisions, there's the intracellular fluid, whatever's inside your cells, and the extracellular fluid, anything that's outside your cells. And then of the extracellular fluid, we can further divide all of that fluid as plasma, the fluid around your blood cells inside your vessels, and interstitial fluid, the fluid that is around your other body cells. Okay. Now, here is a chart that just sort of shows the proportions of your fluid volumes between each of these compartments. And I don't need you to necessarily memorize this or to commit this to memory, but I do want you to think about the proportions. So I do expect you to understand that of the total body water, most of that is inside your cell. So about 28 liters, just about half or so, a little over half, is going to be inside your cells, the intracellular fluid. And then I do expect you to know of the extracellular fluid. So extracellular fluid is a smaller proportion of total body water, but of the extracellular fluid, most of that is going to be your interstitial fluid, the fluid around your body cells. Okay. So of your total body water, most of that is inside your cells. And of your extracellular fluid, most of that is around your cells and tissues.